welcome back to another episode of Civil Discord, your weekly dose of radical curiosity. I am one of your hosts out here in the People's Republic of Texas that just had an election. We had our primary midterms this past Tuesday. Of course, yours truly did not vote, and for reasons that I have explained and can go further into later in life or whatnot. And I had a lot of people mad at me that I didn't vote, but it is what it is. But yes, out here in the People's Republic of Texas, who is also suing the ATF. I will say this.
Oh, I thought you said you were suing it.
No. Not yet. But the state of Texas is suing the ATF because they passed a suppressor bill, and the ATF said, you're not allowed to do that. And Texas said, the Attorney General said, watch me. And so they are currently getting ready to sue the ATF, and we'll see how that goes. But again, one of the many great things that is happening in the state of Texas, Maurice Jones, a.k.a. the notorious BLG, and with me here more often than I am, doing great things out there in the Twitterverse, out there on other podcasts, and so forth, is the one, the only, the supreme overlord of liberty, Amanda, out there in the People's Republic of California. Amanda, how's it going today?
It's going all right. I wish I were doing more great things in the People's Republic of California. I mean, as the supreme overlord of liberty, you would think that my immediate domain would be more responsive to my supreme overlordship. But sadly, this is not the case. And yeah.
That happens when you're dealing with a supermajority House and Senate and governor in the state. Like it's difficult. It's difficult. But you are the brave soul who has decided to take on this challenge and live out there in the land of LA, which I watched a little bit of last night because UCLA played USC in there in LA last night. So I watched a little bit of that. And I thought, I was like, wonder if Amanda's out here paying attention to this game. I don't know. Probably not. But, it is what it is. So go ahead.
No, I was going to say I was not paying attention to the game. I made the horrible decision of deciding to watch Chernobyl, it's an amazing series. It's really well done, and no one should watch it right now because it's like, you really feel like you're watching the train wreck and you're there. Oh, and wow. I just, I've spent 2 hours just kind of, with my head involuntarily cupped in my hands with my mouth open. So no, I was more terrified of Fallout. And, even now I'm noticing that the camera is making my face look redder than it actually is in real life. And I'm like, it looks like the radiation poisoning. Oh gosh. Yeah. So we don't even know it yet.
It's all good. So Chernobyl over the rivalry of UCLA and USC, probably a good choice. I'm not going to lie. Mainly because if you watched the game last night, and I know we don't talk about sports on this podcast or whatnot. It's not a deep thing, but Bill Walton has got to be one of the worst commentators in the history of NCAA basketball. And I just can't stand him. And so every time I watch a game that he is calling, I watch it on mute just so I can watch whatever else. So
I've done that for Caps games because I like the DC Caps commentators and announcers are so good that when I watch them non-locally, I just have to have the sound off because it's just nothing. So
they are miserable. Yeah. But anyway, this is a Civil Discord. Again, we are not a sports podcast. If you want a sports podcast, I don't have any to recommend, mainly because I try not to follow sports as much anymore because I have a life and there are a lot of other things that take up that life, like a wife and kids and a kid on the way and buying a home and all of these things. And weekly, bringing you a great episode every single week. So making sure that we get all of that taken care of. But before we dive into the depths of these things, I have briefly mentioned earlier, I alluded to what the great things that Amanda is out here doing on the Twitterverse. That is an utter cesspool. 99% of the things that happen on Twitter are utter cesspools. But that 1%, you best believe, I know Amanda is going to be a part of. Amanda, what happened this past week?
Well, no,
these past few weeks or so with a tweet that we did.
I just tried to make us. Yeah, no, I mean, again, plausible deniability. It could have been me. It could have been Maurice. We don't know. Nobody knows because it's a civil discord podcast where it's very important that you realize this. Oppo research people listening to this in 20 years.
Yeah, if it's anything hateful and bad or whatnot, it's definitely Maurice. Like, not even a question. I will take ownership of all of that. I'm not backing down off of any of that. Come to me. You can come talk to me, and I will own it 100%.
Thank you. I appreciate. Yeah, no, but I tried to make us famous. And so I would call this a relatively viral tweet. I actually was not trying to make us famous at the time. So there was, I just thought it was cool. So Phil Holloway, he says, he tweets out, informal survey here. Is there a business that has permanently lost your patronage due to COVID-19 policies? If so, what business and why? And I'm noting that the day that he tweets this out is the day that I emailed the UCLA COVID-19 Response and Recovery Task Force with some very probing questions about why they had chosen to continue to this day their N95 mandate indefinitely with no off-ramp.
Wow.
So I was already feeling a little bit spicy.
Right.
And I just fired off most U.S., and this is at Civil Discord Podcast, is that most U.S. universities, their policies of the past 2 years have signaled a complete rupture from any commitment to scientific inquiry, individuality, community, and students' enrichment. The university experience no longer belongs to academia. Now that was just a catharsis that I had, although it comes from a place of truth and yes, it's my lived experience.
Right.
And again, for a little startup podcast, I feel like these were not bad numbers. We had within a matter of days, if that, we got 230 likes. And 20 retweets, 2 of which are quote tweets.
Hey.
So, yeah.
Hey. We out there doing it big. Hey, you can call us small. We may be a small little David, but we taking on Goliath one tweet at a time. That is for sure. Best believe that.
I feel like if we're still calling COVID-19 a pandemic, we can definitely call this tweet viral.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
Easily. Like it's almost as I will say this, and I know we kind of mentioned it in our brief in the pre-show, but how for some reason COVID-19 has kind of disappeared, mainly because of most of what NPCs are. They get their firmware update, and now their talking points are Russia, and they talk about Russia bad, Russia this, Russia that, Putin this, Putin that, and so forth. And it is what it is, and I know last week we had mentioned some things, and hopefully we will get to it in this show. But I had given a disclaimer for everything that I was talking about with Russia and Ukraine, and how things are subject to change. And the more research that I do, I may be like, okay, you know what? Maybe this is the case, and maybe that's the case, and so forth. And so I'm not going to say my views have entirely shifted, but there have been some updates to that, mainly because I'm learning. I'm like, hold up, let me make sure that I'm not being duped here in certain things. So it was quite interesting. But before we get into all of that, there is and pardon me if you guys are coughing or whatnot, I'm kind of under the weather, whatnot. My wife is giving me something, just because she's having those pregnancy issues. Issues.
She made you sick.
She's getting the sickness. Exactly. So for those who don't know, typically when a couple is pregnant, and by couple I really mean the wife, is pregnant, the husband or the person living with the person pregnant, I say husband because my wife and I are married, you typically will show some of the same signs of pregnancy, as the husband may get some morning sickness, the husband may start putting on weight, the husband may have specific cravings for this, that, or the other. And it's so crazy because everybody's like, like, hey, has Maurice started getting anything or not? I'm like, nope, I haven't. It's like, well, he'll start gaining some weight. And I said, nope, if I start gaining weight, y'all need to let me know. So people who are watching live, or who are watching period, if I start gaining weight, like, you know, Maurice is putting on some pounds in the video, you need to comment, let me know, hey, Notorious BLG, you're putting on some weight. That way I can make sure I stay in the gym, get fit, and stay healthy, because I need to make sure that I'm fit for my child that is coming in the next few months. So I'm not trying to put on any weight. All right. So just throwing that out there. But there is a nuke. There's a lot of talk of nukes, a lot of talk of nuclear issues, whatnot, mainly coming out of Russia or whatnot, because are we going to go into World War III? Are we going to have a bunch of nukes going on? Talking about Chernobyl. Like, you watched it. You watched it earlier. You watched it yesterday.
No one should watch Chernobyl. Right
don't watch it, but watch it. Don't watch it though. But there is an Iran nuclear deal that is kind of going on amidst all of this Russia-Ukrainian stuff or whatnot. So what's been going on with that?
Yeah, so the most breaking update, and this I just found this as we were getting ready to go on the show, was an hour or a few ago, is that Russia, who is brokering the Iran nuclear deal, which should give anyone pause right now.
For sure.
Because so this is supposed to be like a quid pro quo between the US and Iran, right? And it's interesting that Russia is powerful enough with respect to this deal that they can come in and say, guess what? We want something too. Like, there are many parties involved in this nuclear deal, and Russia is now saying, if we're going to go forward with this deal that is being brokered, we want sanctions lifted that the U.S. has just imposed. And this seems to be, this is a huge new wrench, and right. It does seem to be it looks like it might be a no-go, even though just hours before this looked pretty definitive. It looked like it was going to go through. This is something of a vanity project that Joe Biden has. And it really is. So obviously there was, or for people who don't know, there was a nuclear deal that the U.S. had with Iran. Iran was essentially not following the terms of that deal, so Trump pulled out of the deal. And now Biden really wants to get back in. However, the terms of this deal right now are really dubious. Again, we're dealing with a country that has a history of hostile rhetoric and in some cases actions against the U.S. and allies, fighting proxy wars. And moreover, we're dealing with a country that has a history of not being faithful in terms of holding up its end of the bargain. We talked about contracts last week and how those are important. Yes. That is a motorcycle, and for a second, I didn't know what it was, and that was terrifying. It just sounded like a crash. There it is. There's a bright flash of light. It's going to come too.
Like some nuclear warheads.
There we go.
Some signal coming off.
No, I need to be like ducking and covering my bathroom then. Interior walls, people. That's where it's at. But so we had this deal, and after we pulled out of this deal, we had sanctions that were imposed on not Iran in general. So this is interesting, right? Last week, we were talking about when sanctions do and don't work. A lot of these sanctions that are up to be lifted, if we go back into this deal, are targeted sanctions, and they have to do with specific individuals. Basically having them, sanctioning them, not having them allowed to travel, whether you agree with that or not. That's kind of one of those super rare instances in which sanctions might be effective if they're not targeting an entire population and they're not targeting entire industries. And it's ironic to me, I'm going to start singing again, but that Joe Biden's kind of abandoning more targeted sanctions at the same time that he's imposing these very, very generalized sanctions that torture the Russian people, all for the sake of being able to say that he got us back into the Iranian nuclear deal. So that's why, I call it a vanity project. At the same time, we continue to allow for Russian oil imports into the U.S. Because once again, U.S. pipelines are bad and nuclear energy is bad, but outsourcing pollution via fossil fuel pipelining to Russia is good for the environment. And now we're talking about Venezuela as well, trying to get and trying to import more fuel for Venezuela. Again, rather than seeking energy independence, we are trying to curry favor with yet another country that, again, abstained from an incredibly ceremonial vote, but abstained from a vote to condemn Russia, along with Iran. So it's interesting the contrast between the rhetoric that we're going to be super hard on Russia, we're going to be super hard on Iran, versus we are still going to allow for Russia's main imports. Iran, of course, if we go back into this deal, we will be able to import more Iranian oil, which, again, just kind of kicking the can down the road as it comes to clean energy independence, and the U.S. has the capacity for that.
Right.
So this is an interesting one to watch. I, of course, have very strong views on the Iranian nuclear deal. It just is very clear to me that Iran has not and will not hold up its end of the bargain. It's currently enriching uranium up to 60% purity. And if you have 90% purity, you have weapons grade levels of uranium enrichment. The nuclear deal would have capped that enrichment capacity at 3.67. But again, we have to remember that Iran was never holding up to this deal. And as it stands right now, the U.S. doesn't profit really anything from the current terms of the deal, as I understand them. There are targeted sanctions that are being lifted from certain Iranians, and in exchange, we maybe get the possibility of Iran sitting down at the table to talk about not enriching uranium. And again, I'm reminding everyone that this is a deal brokered by Russia, to the extent that Russia is now coming in and saying, it's really brokered by, I want to call it the Putin-Iran nuclear deal.
Right.
Russia's now coming in and saying, this deal is off the table if you don't lift sanctions on us as well. And the scary thing is that I think there's such little concentration around it right now that if Joe Biden really wants to, and if he's dogged enough about this, he might just kind of quietly let this go through. And that's my fear. And you have even Democrats in Congress speaking out about how this is kind of weird.
It is weird. And I know I believe we touched on this a little last week as far as Russia brokering this deal while they are doing the things that they want to do. And anytime I hear about things like this, as far as what's going on, it makes me hate states and governments even more, because it's this concept of do I trust people? And the answer is no. So if I don't trust people on a daily basis, like, why would I trust the Iranian government to say, oh yeah, we will keep it where it is right now before we increase our level even more. I don't trust the U.S. to hold their end of the bargain when it comes to things. You know why? Because all the while the U.S. develops their nuclear systems when they tell their brothers, oh no, you're not allowed to have any sort of like nuclear weapons when it this because that's not good, and we want to waiver from all that. All the while we're saying, oh well, that doesn't apply to us, or hey, let's talk about let's say, oh, we need to attack Russia's government with sanctions, all the while they are actually hurting most of the Russian people. Or same thing with Iran. And I get, as libertarians, most libertarians do not like sanctions in the sense of how they work, because what they currently do is they don't affect anybody that needs to be affected by the sanction. It's most of the time, most of the sanctions, they always affect innocent people who have nothing to do with anything that we're dealing with. It's almost kind of like if people are mad at the U.S. because Joe Biden decided to bomb, a specific Middle Eastern country, and so then all of a sudden, innocent people in America are affected by that because the other country came back and said, "Oh, you know what? We need to retaliate." And our first thought is, well, they didn't do anything to you, so why are you doing them? If Joe Biden was your issue, why didn't you just try to do something to Joe Biden and so forth? And so we have all these back and forth things, and which is the big issue with sanctions. When it comes down to it, but I just think that if we, and I say we loosely as far as the U.S. is concerned, are really going to want to have people, I guess, negotiate in good faith, then maybe we should, and we as in the U.S. government should really put some sort of like thought into everything as far as like, okay, maybe Russia should not be the people heading up these conversations. Like, maybe, I mean, if we're the U.S. government and we're talking about flexing our muscles, and I get it's a delicate situation, which the U.S. has kind of like, I mean, what we'll talk about that later, but it's a delicate situation. But the U.S. at some point has got to say, hey, you know what? We're not gonna deal with this anymore. Like, if we're gonna say that we're the this is me arguing for a state. Okay, this is not me saying what should happen. We're going to say, hey, you know what? If we are going to be the United States of America and we're going to be the world police and so forth, at some point, Russia, you've got to kick rocks in this deal. Like, we're not catering to you. Iran, hey, sorry, bud. This is what's going to happen. Here's what you guys got. Take it or leave it. If not, then we will do whatever we got to do to flex our muscles as we should. Okay. Now, I'm not saying that the U.S. government should do that or whatnot, but at this point, it's kind of like, I wonder what Donald Trump would do in this situation. Like, I feel like he would maybe, I don't know, probably grow a pair and say, sorry, this is not how things are going to work because this does not benefit the U.S. in any way, shape, or form or whatnot. And I don't know. I mean, these are all things that are flying on the radar, so it's super dangerous. And it's always one of those things of anytime the news is flooded with one story, there has got to be at least 10 other stories that are flying below the radar that need somewhat of attention that nobody wants to discuss.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I was gonna say basically exactly what you just said, that, this allows people and politicians to slip in their little vanity projects when nobody else is looking. Right. Russia's demanding written guarantees that its economic trade with Iran will be exempted from U.S. sanctions imposed on Russia. Now, this, again, by brokering these deals, by overseeing these deals, this is how, as we discussed last week, countries that are not open trading democracies are still able to have a significant, strong international presence. Right. Again, once again, giving the lie to the myth that every country wants a strong, thriving internal economy. When kleptocracies like Russia, like the Russian government, don't need that, don't require that. No. Again, it's got people on all sides of the aisle concerned. CNN's actually done some good reporting on this. Now, again, what would be lucrative for the U.S. about entering into this deal at this time is that it would open up oil. It would open up oil from Iran, which we're now sanctioning. Again, as we're continuing to allow in Russian oil, which is just so strange, and we've already reached out for Venezuelan oil as well. It's angering in particular when you hear any politician say something like, we need to become energy independent. And really, energy independent means we're not moving toward what's considered clean energy. We're outsourcing what we're considering dirty energy. Right. And that is once again, usually those production standards in our country is very, very high and better for the environment. So right. If we were to open up we were to go forward with the Keystone Pipeline here, that would be a much cleaner source of fuel. That would be a much cleaner source of fuel than you're going to get from Russia. That's going to be a much cleaner source of fuel than you're going to get from a lot of countries. But ultimately, we need to be working toward, things like nuclear energy and, again, clean, sustainable sources of fuel if we're talking about, powering vehicles and so forth. This is, again, kicking the can down the road. Right. And it is it belies this State of the Union rhetoric about make it here, build it here, be energy independent. Oh, by the way, come on in, Venezuela and Russia, and help us also with the Iran nuclear deal.
Oh man, I this is how far removed I am from politics, and maybe it's just how far removed I am just from Joe Biden. I did not know there was a State of the Union until the day after the State of the Union. Like, had no idea. The only reason why I knew is because somebody had, I think it was, I popped up on my Instagram of Nancy Pelosi almost falling over or whatnot as she was getting up to clap. Like that, it was that one. And then who was
Chuck
it?
Schumer?
Yes, Chuck Schumer standing up and clapping at the wrong time. And then he clapped like 5 seconds too early. And then all of a sudden he goes to sit back down and then everybody stands up and starts clapping. Like it was, and then that's when I was like, oh, snap. There's a State of the Union.
It's all right, Maurice. You shouldn't feel bad because Joe Biden also didn't know that there was a State of the Union until the day after it happened. So you're in good company.
Oh man, it was pure gold. But I did watch some of the highlights from it. And by highlights, I mean I did like listen to parts of it, but the highlights as far as the blunders that were of when he mentioned he was talking about the Ukraine Russia incident, and he was discussing how he said, man, the Iranian people, really need our help. And literally
it is linked. It is linked.
They are linked. And then you see Kamala Harris just like, what? Kind of have this look on her face like, golly, like I cannot believe this man literally just said this.
Yeah.
Like nobody was talking about Iran in this. Probably like nobody should be even focusing on Iran because of the deal that we're dealing with right now. And you're up there just, oh man, it was just pure gold. So many things to get into as far as the State of the Union, as far as highlights for me. So many things to get into, but that was probably one of my favorite parts. Him calling the Ukrainians Iranians.
The Iranian people.
Exactly. Oh, that was gold.
Yeah, no, I mean, maybe he had advance information that Russia was going to try to pull out of the deal. And he's like, no, we're not going to quash the gas exports of the Iranian people. No, we can go into those highlights and lowlights. It was, so first of all, the first 20 minutes or so of the speech were obviously hastily slapped together to deal with the Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And one thing that irks me so much is this rhetoric about how cheer up Ukraine, the arc of history bends toward freedom. The arc of history doesn't freaking bend toward freedom, okay? Unless you're Hegel and you think that we're all just progressing toward this great freedom. There is no arc of history that progresses toward freedom, okay? That is the entire point. Freedom is very, very rare. It doesn't happen when you sit around and wait. And it is so insulting. I can only imagine how insulting it is to be over there and to hear this, let's stand up and show Ukraine our support. This ceremonial bluster about how it's going to be okay because freedom always prevails. Right. If you're in a subway station that's supposed to double as a bomb shelter getting shelled, I think that's pretty cold comfort. And so, again, I'm not saying it shouldn't have been addressed. It absolutely should have been addressed, but it was cheapened by the rhetoric about how, well, of course, freedom is inevitable because it is, as they say in The Loop, very evitable. Freedom is extremely evitable, and any talk otherwise cheapens both freedom and cheapens the conflict. I also thought it was very funny. I mean, it's just, you just gotta laugh. Again, it feels like performance art when Biden says we have to fund the police now. Everyone stands up and cheers, which of course was workshopped and focus grouped, and I get that.
100%.
But what's particularly irksome is that again, what a lot of libertarians have argued for is more community-based policing, where it's more localized and, we eliminate public sector unions like law enforcement unions. We end qualified immunity, and police officers, law enforcement are more directly accountable to people that they serve. That's not what Biden is jockeying for here. His aim is to nationalize the police, is centralize policing by having the DOJ take over local law enforcement. Whatever happened to community-based policing? If you centralize the police and if you have the DOJ take over, then you basically, you're able to turn the police on your enemies. If you think there are problems with the way that we police now, so much worse when you nationalize the police and have DOJ oversight.
And this is why I give a lot of flack to my community for strictly voting Democrats and so forth. And I give a lot of flack to a lot of people who strictly vote Republicans and whatnot too. So don't believe me. I don't discriminate in that nature at all. Like, everybody gets it. Everybody can get it. But it's like, I really feel like Democrats believe that Americans are stupid. Like, I legit believe that. There's no other way. There's no way you can convince me otherwise. When for the past 2 years, 3 years. No, 2 years. Sorry, George Floyd, 2020, everything. Yeah, COVID. So past 2 years, you hear nothing but defund the police. Defund the police. Now, I will say that I don't remember Joe Biden explicitly stating these things or whatnot, but it was definitely a lot of like, hey, we need to focus on policing to make sure that because we have black and brown men who are being shot in the streets. And talking about the whole George Floyd thing and all of that and everything that was an opportunistic thing for them to pounce upon. But for 2 years, you hear, oh, we have to defund the police, and this is what BLM is talking about because Black Lives Matter, and we got to make sure we move the funding from the police departments into the social services to make sure that we send out social workers out there to these calls and this, that, or the other. And then you turn around and in your State of the Union speech talking about police departments don't need to be defunded. They need to be funded. And that's what we've been doing. We've been funding the police. And I'm just like what? And then for the rest of these Democrats to stand up there and cheer, like, yes, this is the platform that we've been running on forever. And yes, we love it. We want to fund the police. We want to give them more resources. We want to make sure that they have everything that they need to police the communities that they're in. And I'm just like, there's no way that they can really get away with this. And the thing is, they will. They 100% will. Nobody's going to care about it. Nobody's going to think about it. Everybody's going to move on and think like, oh yeah, Democrats, because they decide to rewrite. Most politicians decide to rewrite history often. And so they will go back and say, yeah, we've always been the party of that because Joe Biden was always tough on crime. So he always wanted to make sure that the police were well off and so forth. And I think that's a lot more to appease specific unions and things of nature. And I also believe that they've seen other cities who started this whole defund the police thing go back and readjust and say, nah, we need to make sure that our police have resources in these specific communities because our crime rates are going up even higher. I want to say there were studies that came out in 2021 that in cities, I can't remember, and I should have pulled it up, and I'm sorry. But there were specific cities that they had done a study that they had higher crime rates in 2021 than they did in 2020. And
that was a lot of them.
Yeah.
Chicago, I think New York City.
Yes. And all in which cities were like, hey, we are moving funding from our police departments into other areas to make sure that everybody is appeased and so forth. And I thought, and it's, you see that and you're just like, look, I am not supportive of I'm not like Blue Lives Matter and so forth and then things of that nature. But golly, I know how to fix it. And you're wrong, but I would much rather you fund my local police departments than defund them 100%. And it was crazy. Because I remember having conversations with people who tried to explain to me what defund the police actually meant. It didn't mean, to take money from them. And I'm like, okay, so I guess you're not a linguist. I'm pretty sure defund means take money from. Like, I'm funding you, so I stop funding you. Like, that's taking money from you. I don't know. I don't get it. People are just crazy. Go ahead. I'm
Even
sorry.
as a libertarian, I remember saying, yeah, on strictly speaking, I support defunding the police on the grounds that I support taking money away from most agencies.
Right.
So yes, I do. But it was very funny to kind of see that backbending and then having people who are more extreme on the issue double down and say, no, we mean like abolish the police.
Right.
And this internal, this internecine, you're not helping. Well, this is what we want. And that conflict still persists. It's very difficult to be a party with the majority and to have these conflicts aired. But yeah, it was really interesting hearing that more Trumpian rhetoric and seeing Democrats clap for it. By the way, still spaced 1 seat apart. I loved it. Like, people haven't got their masks on for the most part, but they're still sitting one seat space apart. Okay, that's not 6 feet. That's not even 3 feet.
Right.
And it doesn't matter anyway. And I don't know why you're doing that. It's like the slow walk back, the very slow walk back.
Exactly. What else? So he talked about funding the police.
Fund the police.
He talked about securing the borders.
Yeah.
He talked about like bringing jobs back to America. He talked about all these things, and I literally thought, like, this guy sounds like a Wish version of Donald Trump. Like, he sounds like if those of you who don't know what Wish is like the knockoff brands of everything. You can get everything and anything from Wish or whatnot. If you get a pair of, let's say, Beats headphones, the Beats headphones are typically like $200. You can go on Wish and get the same pair and get a pair from China for $30. Okay, and you're risking it'll take it 2 months to get to you. Now with COVID and stuff like that, probably closer to 3.5, 4, and when it shows up on your doorstep, you'll forget that you have it, that you even ordered it. But I'm like, literally everything that this man is saying, man, that sounds like a knockoff version of Donald Trump. Building America is like building back America better or something like that.
Yeah, no, so he changed the name of the bill. I can't say the name of the bill because I always laugh. But it's now there. Yeah, but it's now, they changed the name because he realized that they can't pass that bill, but it's the same bill. It's just rebranded. And so most of the speech was indeed him outlining that policy agenda, which is just the same bill recycled, but branded almost to MAGA. Like, he did everything short of saying "Make America Great Again."
Yes.
I almost think that he did.
Building America better again. That's what it is.
It's crazy. It's crazy. We're all taking crazy pills.
Oh my gosh. I feel like Mugatu on Zoolander. Like, Zoolander. Am I taking crazy pills? Like, yes, yeah. I've got to be.
You are. And this is, at moments like this, I am so happy to be a libertarian. I'll tell you why. Because, yes, it's annoying, but it's so refreshing because I don't have to carry anyone's water anymore. Yes. And so it's just, like, every side does crazy stuff. And I'm just like, I don't have to defend any of you.
Exactly.
Because you're all morons. And exactly. it feels so good. So at this point, you just laugh at the recycled rhetoric getting ping pong back and forth. But what is troublesome, obviously, are the very real developments that are being swept under the table. Kind of behind the shiny rhetoric.
Yeah, it was. I mean, it's hilarious to watch, but sad to see. Just everything that is happening within the U.S. government. I mean, even just how people describe certain situations and how they. I think he talked about how this was the best job growth in American history, and and it's one of those things of like, it's not because you. It couldn't possibly be because you and the previous president before you decided to bring the economy to a crashing halt and tell people that they couldn't go to work. And indirectly, let me say indirectly tell people that they can't go to work, and now all of a sudden you're claiming that COVID is nearly over and that we're past all of this and that people are able to go back to work and do all these things. Like, that couldn't possibly be it. That, like, the mere fact that over the past 2 years people just haven't been able to go to work, and now that they are, people are coming off of unemployment because they're taking away the benefits for that. Like, that could not be it. Like, stop taking credit for something that you caused in the first place. Like, that's like, literally, and I know people use this all the time, that's somebody coming and breaking your leg, and then they do the surgery on your leg. They put the bones in there, the screws in there to line it all back up, stitch you up, and say you're welcome for healing you. And it's just like, no, you idiot! You're the one who broke my leg in the first place. No, U.S. government, you're the one who caused this job loss in the first place. You cannot take credit for something that you caused. Like, go ahead.
Yeah, no, it's even worse than that, because it's like me taking $1,000 from you and then handing back $700 and saying, Maurice, you just earned $700.
Right.
You made $700. Aren't you excited?
Yeah.
For those of you who don't know, yes, so these job numbers, this record job growth, what happened, this is literally what happened, is there were jobs that were lost permanently because of COVID-19 policies and shutdowns. And then some of those jobs were restored. And because so many jobs were lost, even a portion of those jobs being restored is record job growth because of the record job loss.
Exactly.
And we still haven't gotten back. So there is no record job growth net, or really even gross. There's just not record job growth. I saw a beautiful new genre fact check, by the way, on this, which is, it's chef's kiss. So there was a fact check that said it was partially true, Joe Biden's claim that we had record job growth. And I know what you're thinking. Oh, they probably talked about how this was related to the COVID policy. No. They said the numbers are correct, but we only started measuring job growth in the 1930s. The implication being that we might have had more job growth like prior to the 1930s than this, but we will never know. This is a brilliant new genre of fact check, because it's not quite gaslighting. What it is you take a claim that is demonstrably false, and then you say it's somewhat false for a reason that is entirely crap and has nothing to do with the reason that it's actually false. And then you can go and parade yourself around as some bastion of journalistic integrity because you have fact-checked this thing that is entirely false as partly true because of this irrelevant detail that actually makes you sound silly for not saying it's completely true. It's gorgeous.
These people, they will find some way to make sure that they are right in some sense. Instead of just sucking them and say, "Hey, no, you wrong on that one," they gonna say that you right. But I mean, hey, if you haven't watched the State of the Union, I don't encourage you to go watch it.
You don't need to. We just told you all of it.
Exactly. There are great clips that are on there. I think it's like a minute 19-second clip of how great the State of the Union was, and it is literally just Joe Biden blunders and him just people just making all kinds of crazy faces and oh yes,
yeah, the knuckle rubbing.
Nancy Pelosi. For some reason, for those of us who are watching, if you haven't seen the State of the Union, you see when he starts talking about, I think he starts talking about like people in Afghanistan, and because he was talking about his son Bo, and then there was this crazy, and there was an outbreak of Republicans saying, "Hey, what about the 13? Why didn't you name them the 13 Americans that died?" and so forth, but you see Nancy Pelosi in the background just like get so giddy when she's, and almost like it's sickening where he's literally talking about like death and how they are man, it's
they're in burn pits, like there's
Like, and she's just like, oh yes, like, oh
Rubs
my
her
gosh,
knuckles together.
yeah, like almost like Schmiegel, my precious type stuff, you know,
Really
like.
odd.
It was so sick. I mean, and I don't know if she was prepping for a clapping situation or whatnot, but the optics were not good. I will say this: for State of the Unions, the optics were just not good at all for this specific one. They just were not. I mean, it's people standing up and clapping at the wrong things at the wrong time. Republicans saying specific outbreaks. Having outbursts and this that. I mean, the optics were just not good, especially for Democrats who are expected to lose by landslides come the midterms. It does not bode well for them. This just didn't look right.
No, yeah. Man, I had another thought and it completely left me. I feel like Joe Biden with a teleprompter just. Blah, 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 blah. Oh yeah, no.
Never
cancer.
go off script.
Yeah, no. I went off script. Sorry, that was my Kamala impression. She did that earlier this past week. But there was a bit about how we're gonna end cancer as we know it. In the State of the Union, I got nervous because anytime the government tries to end something as we know it, it usually ends up being worse.
Yeah.
I don't know if you realize this, but drug addiction, war.
Yeah.
There's a lot. Inflation.
Yeah.
Poverty. There's a lot that government programs have tried to end as we. I mean, COVID. I feel I'm worried about what is the ivermectin of cancer treatment that is now going to be blocked because of some random clause in emergency authorization. I'm partly joking, but I'm also kind of worried. I think anytime you try to federalize medicine and federalize science, usually things go poorly.
Definitely. They typically do. Speaking of Kamala Harris, I don't know. Did you hear her describe what is happening in Ukraine? If you haven't, and I'm pretty sure all our listeners have, but I just got to say exactly how she like it's. I feel like my niece, who is 4, would be very excited on how she described this, because my niece is 4 and she doesn't understand places as far as the vastness of the world and how war works, and she doesn't understand how countries work. But this is how y'all's vice president, I'm gonna say y'all, not me, I don't claim her. I don't claim her, nor do I. Not my president.
She's my vice president. She is. She's mine. I'm an American. I love America. She's my vice president. Not super happy about it, but she is.
Like, hey, she goes, so Ukraine is a country in Europe. It exists next to another country called Russia. Russia is a bigger country. Russia is a powerful country. Russia decided to invade a smaller country called Ukraine. So basically, that's wrong, and it goes against everything we stand for. I mean, the words were so profound that,
stunning and brave.
My goodness. I mean, couldn't have said it better myself. I don't know. Could not have said it better myself. Describing Russia as a country and as a powerful country. And then Ukraine as a smaller country. Yes, Russia is a bigger country. Ukraine is a smaller country. Like, and maybe her target audience was 5-year-olds.
Well, right. To be fair, she was the person that was prefaced with explain it in layman's terms, I believe.
Okay, I'll give it to her.
Yeah, there's a difference though between layman's terms and that. Maybe this is just my libertarian soullessness, but what I found most jarring about that explanation is that it cues it up to be like, the big country is always the bad country, is always the worst. Now again, country that invades other country, bad thing to do. But and again, rather than emphasizing the fact that the invasion is what's bad, although she does at the end, but she prefaces that with Russia's the bigger country and invaded the smaller. No, if a smaller country invaded a big country, that would also be
Still bad. Exactly.
Size doesn't matter, is what I'm trying to say here. Size does not matter. Invasion does.
It is. I don't know. I just can't take anything this administration does seriously. I can't take them. I just can't take government seriously anymore. Even so, onto this whole Russia and Ukraine thing and whatnot. And I just as I so over this past week, I kind of thought about. I was like, what did I say last week? And let me just kind of get an idea of my thoughts and put them together and just think, okay, one, my first question was, what does the U.S. have to do with all this? Because for some reason or another, whatever conflict happens around the world, the U.S. has part in it. Like they just do. And I am not part of this blame America first type thing. Like I'm not. But if everything that happens around the world involves the United States in some way, shape, or form, I'm going to ask, okay, why does this involve the United States and what is happening? Like, why is it that Putin decides to make his moves at the time that he's currently making his moves? And why is it that he is moving in a certain way? And then why is he telling the Russian people something completely different than what is being told to me as far as the media and so forth, as far as what I see and this, that, or the other? And then and so I kind of started thinking, I was just like, okay, like let me get somewhat of an idea. And Russia's mad because Ukraine doesn't want to, because Ukraine is being talked about as being part of NATO, and it's just like, okay, well, let's go back to NATO. So why is Ukraine being part of that? And it just took me down this whole long rabbit hole of NATO, and understanding that NATO was only supposed to go as far as Germany, and now.
Oh, that's not quite correct.
What? No, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say it initially that was the initial formation of
Right.
NATO, but there was not kind of an agreement that it's not going to include other countries as well. So there was talk about that, but there was never anything officiated, with regard to NATO
Right.
and NATO expansion.
Right. And then you kind of see like, okay, well, NATO is slowly starting to creep in. It's just this concept of Russia has always been deemed as the bad guy to the West. Like, I mean, since longer than I've been alive. I mean, let's be real. I mean, we're talking Cold War here. So, and again, I am not defending anybody on any sort of level at all, because I guarantee there's going to be people like, oh, well, Maurice is a Putin lover and he's over here. And I'm like, no. But I can see that because at first Putin was, his concept was, I'm just going to take back areas that already want to be part of Russia. Like that was the first step. So I was like, okay, like these are areas who don't want to be part of Ukraine. They've already deemed themselves to be pro-Russia, and that is what he originally was doing. And I was like, okay, like this makes sense. And then it just took me down this rabbit hole of like my goodness, like I can't believe everything that I see as far as from what we are being told, because I'm a firm believer in the U.S. is nothing but propaganda as far as our media is, just like everything else. So why would I believe everything that the U.S. is telling me? And then I think the key factor was when I started to hear myself think of things and be like, man, this is the same thing that everybody else is saying. Like, and I'm not saying that last week we were saying what everybody else is saying, because we weren't. But I was like, as I got deeper into it, I was like, this sounds awfully familiar. Like, hold up, let me take a step back and let me not fall into a concept of what happened in 2001, what happened in 2005 and 2006. with weapons of mass destruction and this, that, and the other. And I'm just like, okay, but I mean, all that being said, Putin is still an aggressor. Like, I'm not saying that he is not, but it did have me kind of it did cause me to pause and think like, okay, maybe there's a little bit more that meets the eye to this entire situation that I am missing, kind of thing.
Right. And I mean, I think it's always good to reflect on that kind of thing. What's interesting is that Russia was the first to implicate the U.S. You know, what does the U.S. have to do with this? Well, perhaps in one sense, you could make the argument that it shouldn't, but Russia is in fact the one that said, you know, Russia's making John Mearsheimer's argument and saying this is America's fault. This is the West's fault. This is NATO's fault. So this is, in a way, and I'm, you know, it's Putin, not Russia, but in a way, yes, this is proximally about Ukraine, but Putin has been very clear from day one that this is a retaliation against Western decisions. And in fact, part of his anger at Ukraine is he considers it this Western puppet government. And so it's not just, this place that he wants to take back. It's a symbol of Western encroachment on what he considers, yes, to be his territory.
Right.
In terms of sanction-related involvement or what have you, and again, I think you and I have both been very vocal about how we feel about a lot of these sanctions. But when it comes to trade relations, which again, this is one area that the U.S. government is still a little bit touchy about. You know, if we're importing Russian oil and then Russia does something crappy, it's sort of like, you know, you're patronizing a business and the business does something bad with which you don't agree. Well, if you're a conscientious consumer, you maybe shouldn't patronize that business.
Right.
And so if you look at it from the standpoint of conscientious consumption, that's a point of, again, it's a point of legitimate involvement if it's targeted. And again, going back to the whole irony of really not taking a firm line against Russian oil imports, but, you know, crippling an entire people. There is a narrative that I think is very strange, and I've seen it in a lot of libertarian camps, that people are pushing for war with Russia, and I actually haven't seen that. I know Zelensky is trying to have NATO enforce a no-fly zone, and NATO's saying, no, we're not going to do that. I think most people with clear heads in the U.S. and abroad are saying we're not going to put boots on the ground, and there's a tendency. I think there's a fear that we would put boots on the ground because it feels, I think, similar for a lot of people to what happened with other American encroachments in countries. And of course, we always have to be careful that there are ways to take a side in a conflict, and there are in a conflict in which you've been implicated, in a way that does not escalate to the level of warfare. I think a lot of this response that I'm seeing, and again, it's fantastic, and I encourage everyone to be a critical media consumer. So I'm not saying not to do that, but a lot of the kind of knee-jerk response that I've seen from some people, that's like, well, what's so bad about Russia? Which I'm not saying you're saying that,
right?
But
right.
a lot of that response, I think, comes from a fear of people pushing to go to war and warmongering. And yeah, there's been a little bit of that, but I haven't seen that in any way, which I'm really afraid of, from U.S. authorities. So
I haven't either. Like if I've heard it in conversations with people.
Yeah.
And which is very, which I actually got into some trouble because I got into a conversation with somebody and they called me selfish and like if somebody's house is burning down, would you wouldn't go in there to save them? And I'm like, that's not the situation that's happening now. But I mean, I would like, and I said it last week. Like it's if somebody's being aggressed upon, and I can do something about it, then allow me to do something about it. But I don't think. I think the analogy that they were using was wrong. But I was called selfish. I was called, I wanted civilians to die, like, and all this stuff. And I'm just like, all because I don't want to put U.S. men and women in a war to go and die for a cause that they have no idea what it's about. Like, it's and like, well, when you sign up for military, you give your life away. And I'm like, yeah, I get that, but that doesn't mean that I still want people to go over there and die for this, as in the grand scheme of things. And that I was called selfish, and I was just like, well, I think it's selfish that you would want people to do that and you're not willing to do that yourself. So
and I think that the burning building analogy could be apt if you're talking about, okay, well, do you run into the burning building or do you hose it down? Do you call the fire department? Do you help your neighbor like build their home back up?
Right.
There are a lot of options that don't amount to running into a burning building that I think are and should be very much on the table. Just like, you see someone getting beat up in the street. How do you react? Well, you should probably do something. You should probably do something. Just because you have a right not to do something doesn't mean you have a responsibility.
Of course.
And especially if you do have, if you are still the best option for liberty on the planet, I mean, there's not really a place that I consider to be freer than the U.S. for all its flaws. I think that is worth strengthening. But yeah, I wouldn't put boots on the ground at this stage. It would be very different if we had a draft. I would very much object to any kind of draft. You do make the point about, there being a voluntary military service. It's not like you're making someone go in. But at the same time, it's something that I wouldn't do at this point. And I actually would be very worried about that happening openly. If you want to send special ops or something, that's above my pay grade. And certainly if you want to volunteer, which there's actually people are now being offered the opportunity to volunteer, go over to your Ukrainian embassy with your paperwork. And if you have military training, you can go and fight. And some people have actually from multiple countries taken them up on that. And I think, okay, fantastic.
Yeah.
I said, going back to the no-fly zone, I was talking with someone else today. I said, the way that we could get around the no-fly zone thing if we really wanted to is we could kind of stage a Berlin airlift type of situation where you have all of these cities that are being besieged. They don't have supplies. NATO says, okay, we're going to deliver humanitarian aid. This is not a no-fly zone. We're just going to deliver humanitarian aid. And then if Russia then shoots at a NATO plane, then that's an escalation against NATO forces. I'm not saying that should be done. I'm just saying that is one workaround that, I don't know, Lindsey Graham or something might be considering. He had some interesting ideas on the Twitter machine. I don't know if that was Ambi and Lindsey Graham or something arguing for a palace coup against Vladimir Putin. I don't know how they're going to get to him, quite frankly. I don't know how they're going to get to Putin to stage a palace coup. He's got that super long table. He can't. You've got to run across the entire length of the room, sitting at the end of my long table.
How do you think this ends?
How do I think this? It's interesting, right? Because there have been a number of different time estimates. I saw a really optimistic take. I'm not putting much credence in it, but that Russia is so strapped for supplies that this could end in a couple months. And then other people say, no, this could be like just a prolonged conflict that goes on for 15, 20 years. And we occasionally hear about it. How does it end? I don't know, because there are so many competing interests that I don't know about. That could completely change the shape of this. The best way for this to end is for Putin to have the ability to declare victory and leave. I think that's an option that if he's rational, then he can say, okay, we liberated these separatist regions and we defeated the people who were trying to keep us from liberating these separatist regions. And now we're going to go back and celebrate our victory. I think there is, but before nuclear war, I think there would be an ousting. There would be some kind of internal refusal and resistance culminating
For sure.
in an assassination.
Okay.
But yeah, what about you?
I think this ends the way that you just said.
Mm-hmm.
As far as like hey, we went into these areas that didn't want to be part of Ukraine, um, and we liberate them, and we'll move back, and so now they are free to kind of move about, or if they want to be part of Russia, then yeah, kind of like I think these turn into this is like Crimea part 2,
Yeah.
3, 4, and 5.
Yeah.
Like that's honestly where I see this going. It's it's because Crimea and when that first happened was all over the news. It was like because I vividly remember that as far as like, oh man, what's going on, and then I want to say it was 3 months in the news cycle. It kind of died down. I think this one may last a little bit longer, but I think it'll turn into a Putin kind of veers back and says, "Hey, they're part of us now, or if they want to be, but hey, they're free. They're pro Russia anyway. They don't want to be part of Ukraine, so here we are." And then they go back because I don't think that Russia can sustain this level of offensive forces for any sort of long haul at all. And I think that ultimately, there would if things continue down this path for a duration of time, I think the people of Russia will absolutely revolt. Like
Yeah.
it is 100% in their blood to get rid of whoever's in power, whoever's causing them harm. So they will 100% revolt on that. And so I think that Putin knows that and understands that. Like he's not an idiot. I don't think he's the smartest man in the world, but he's definitely not an idiot. So I think he would see like, okay, you know what? I'm going to save face here. I don't want to push things longer than what they would need to be. I don't think he's crazy enough to do some nuclear things or whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
So ultimately, I think he kind of goes back, declares victory, says, "Hey, these areas are good. We're free to go." And then I think for him that that allows him to flex his muscle enough to say, "Hey, NATO, like I don't want you trying to make puppets out of these countries that border me," because I I I think a part of me believes that he's reacting in a way because people who deem him to be evil are slowly starting to encroach on his borders.
But are
And
they his borders though? I mean, if
well, like Russian borders. So if you start moving closer and closer, and you having NATO countries start to border Russia, and then you're just he's kind of like okay, he may feel like a cornered dog.
yeah.
And so he's like, okay, like, are you guys just trying to limit, like, you guys trying to flex your muscle on me? Like, what do I have to do to show you that I'm no threat and whatnot? And so he has to show something to say like, hey, don't mess with me, kind of thing, because I'm crazy. And so a part of me believes that that is part of his mentality in doing this, as far as, because hey, Ukraine's trying to be part of NATO, and adding all these other things. It's like NATO's literally on his border. Like, I'm not too sure how I feel about that as a leader, so let me kind of flex my muscles, kind of thing.
Right. And I mean, I also, I think the timing is significant. I think it's also, as as I said last week, it's just this continuing, Russia is the cuckold of the West, I think, in Putin's mind. And he's, whether that's true or not, very upset about that. The belief that there could be any threat from NATO, like taking over Russia. I think maybe he finds that NATO is taking over Russia ideologically or whatever, and that's very clear in his anti-Western rhetoric. But certainly territorially, no. And it would be foolish, again, to quote from The Princess Bride, you never get involved in a land war in Asia. And Russia's Eurasia. So,
Right.
you just don't do that.
Right.
If we're talking about the overall geopolitical implications, I think one thing that's very significant is we are seeing a turn to rearming. across Europe. Even Japan has started considering nuclear armament. And I come out on the anti-Ben Shapiro school of this. Ben Shapiro is on this crusade right now, where he feels like, Western or America has to be the sole military hegemon. And while I don't want China to be a military hegemon, I don't want Iran to be a military hegemon, I think a stronger Europe, and we're allied with most of the countries in Europe, I think a stronger Europe militarily is a good thing, especially when, NATO countries are supposed to be contributing 2% of GDP to NATO arming. And there hasn't been much military innovation in Europe in the last while. The fact that we're seeing countries strengthening themselves without encroaching on others is to those countries' benefit. So it'll be interesting to see kind of a rearming of Western countries.
That would be interesting. We'll see how it all turns out. Tune in next week to see if any drastic measures have happened, or Putin is running back to Russia. So, but guys, thanks again for listening. I know that this is a longer episode than normal, roughly about 10 minutes longer or so. But thank you so much for listening. Thank you for being fans of the show, for subscribing, for listening, for following us on all of those forms of social media. Thank you for us having a COVID. If COVID is a pandemic, we have a viral tweet going on. So please make sure to leave us a 5-star rating review on Apple Podcasts. We know we are worth every single bit of those 5 stars. Please share the show with a friend or a family member, maybe somebody in Ukraine, somebody in Russia. Maybe share it with your warmonger friend who thinks that we need to go to war, who thinks that we need to go to war with Russia. Maybe share it with your completely ANCAP friend who thinks that the world is just horrible and all governments suck. Like yours truly. So do all of that. Follow us on Instagram and on Twitter. Instagram, call me Maurice, like the Space Cowboy, like Steve Miller Band, and Civil Discord Podcast. And then follow us on Twitter at Civil Discord Pod, and Ajax the Griff for Amanda, for all of her lovely tweets that she does and that we do. That way you guys don't know who it is. Okay.
No clue.
And if I'm telling you, anything crazy that comes out of that Twitter handle, you can rest assured that it is me. Anything crazy.
License to kill.
Come at me. But make sure you do all of that, and we will be back again with another episode of Civil Discord. Until then, y'all be easy.
Stay fierce.